Chapter 1253, I Wish You Well. Only when Klein was about to reach the end of the flight of stone steps did the two Silver Knights guards outside the Giant King's court react. They turned their heads as the orange glow behind their visors flashed twice, as though it was confirming the identity of the visitor. Furthermore, they had a moment of confusion. Half of Klein's face was normal, and the other half was terrifying. The right side of his mouth curled up exaggeratedly. The transparent maggots on his left slowly twisted, revealing a frightening and indifferent smile. Thud! With his right foot crossing the final step, he arrived at the platform where the Giant King's court was located. Suddenly, a silvery white crack appeared on Klein's forehead as countless silver rays emitted from his body. His entire body instantly shattered into pieces of flesh and blood. These fragments floated up and quickly thinned and faded, turning into paper shreds. Klein, in his top hat and black trench coat, appeared one after another in different spots. However, they were all ripped apart by the silver sword beams. Some of them degenerated into illusions, while others turned into paper figures. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared outside the main door of the Giant King's court, where two guards had disappeared. It was a huge doll dressed in a dark and complicated long dress with evil vines wrapped around it. Rionette Tinker. When Klein climbed up the stone steps, the person he summoned was none other than Miss Messenger. However, she had appeared in wraith form, so Colin Iliad, Lovia, and Derek didn't see her. At this moment, the two Silver Knights who had concealed their evil intentions and were hiding with the help of the light were chasing Klein out of instinct. They had already exposed their whereabouts after the angel-level powerhouse's prolonged observations. Rionette Tinker's bright red eyes immediately reflected a seemingly blank area. There was a flash of light, and a white rabbit suddenly jumped out of nowhere. It bounced around and circled the area, its eyes abnormally vapid. Immediately following that, Miss Messenger took a step forward and disappeared. In another area, the remaining knight in silver armor appeared. His actions turned stiff and slow. He had been possessed by a wraith. Klein, who had used himself as bait, stopped blinking. He pressed his hand to his chest and gave a very ceremonial bow. "I've found the two of you. I wish you well." He straightened his body, raised his right hand, and snapped his fingers. Boom! The white-furred rabbit suddenly exploded, its flesh splattering all over the ground. Then he walked towards the Silver Knight guard, who tried his best to struggle, but to no avail. When the two figures crossed each other, Rionette Tinker's historical projection returned to the fog of history, while the Silver Knight followed closely behind Klein and very obediently returned to the edge of the stone steps with him. He had already become Klein's marionette. "We can enter." Klein smiled as he said to Colin Iliad and the others at the bottom of the stone stairs. Derek's eyes lit up as he inwardly marveled. Mr. World is really powerful. He managed to finish off two Silver Knight guards single-handedly so quickly. Colin Iliad turned his head to glance at Lovia. From her gaze, he could sense her heavy emotions. The City of Silver's chief had no change in expression. He held the two swords that refracted the light of dawn and steadily walked up the stone steps. He came to Klein's side and whispered, "Mutant." Klein pressed down a worm of spirit that formed his left eye and smiled without answering. After Derek and Lovia walked up the stairs, the four demigods and a marionette turned and arrived at the main door of the Giant King's court. During this process, Klein stowed away the Silver Knight Beyonder characteristic that had seeped out from the rabbit. This was a reward for Rionette Tinker. According to the agreement between him and the angel, the spoils of war that Klein had obtained from summoning a historical projection would be split equally with Miss Messenger. Rionette Tinker took the Beyonder characteristic, while Klein obtained a Silver Knight marionette. He looked up at the main door and made the Silver Knight guard, who was much taller than him, take a few steps forward and insert the sword into the ground. Then, the Silver Knight bent down and stretched out his hands to press on the door that was dozens of meters tall. After a heavy screeching sound, the door with golden nails slowly opened. At this moment, the sun in the sky leaped, and the entire Giant King's court froze into an orange-red dusk. The huge door opened faster and faster, and the scene inside was gradually revealed to Klein and company. A grayish-white figure was covered in orange-red light. Countless stairs extended from behind the door all the way to the tallest and most magnificent residence of the Giant King. On the way, there were no obstacles. There were palaces and towers on both sides. Giant statues covered in iron-colored armor stood in front of different buildings, guarding the path that led to the residences of the god. "It's time for you to perform." Klein turned his head to the side and gave an exaggerated smile to Colin Iliad and Lovia. The former demon hunter, Colin, nodded slightly without any objections. Behind Lovia, an illusory figure covered in silver armor with dark red eyes that was several meters tall appeared. Pa pa pa. The giant statues on both sides of the Divine Kingdom's staircase emitted silvery white beams as they emitted shattering sounds. The silver flowers that bloomed kept spreading upwards as if they were welcoming the guests. Before long, 3 silver knights, Colin Iliad, the soul grazed by Lovia, and the marionette controlled by Klein, cleared out the giant statues guarding the Divine Kingdom's staircase, leaving only the area closest to the Giant King's residence. They didn't attempt it out of caution. At that moment, 2 figures flew out of the Giant King's palace and slid towards the 3 silver knights. One of them had a shadowed face, black, curly hair that reached its shoulders, and a pair of black wings on its back. The other was a pure shadow that distorted to the sides from time to time. They were Inuni, who had mutated at some point in time, and Klein's shadow, who were both under the influence of the Dark Angel. In the battlefield filled with thick fog, a layer of grayish-white dragon scales suddenly appeared on Audrey's body. This was a result of her seeing something she shouldn't see. Even with the fog blocking her view, high-level creatures at the angel level could still corrupt and damage living beings that saw them. As a demigod of the spectator pathway, Audrey immediately retracted her gaze and calmed her mind to control herself from losing control. As her thoughts raced, she took a few steps back and used psychological invisibility to hide in the thick fog. She was in no hurry to infiltrate the Intis and Fasak allied forces camp. She was waiting for an opportunity, one that she believed would definitely appear. Time passed by so slowly that Audrey imagined that it had stopped. After an unknown period of time, she finally saw the fog over the Allied forces' base turn dark, like the sun plunging past the horizon. Night had begun to rule this world. Silently, the Intis, Fasak soldiers and officers closed their eyes and fell asleep. This included many other Beyonders. Audrey, who was hiding not far away, also fell asleep. However, as a dreamwalker who had been cued in advance, she managed to stay lucid. Then, without knowing how long the opportunity would last, she used dream traversal to enter the Intis, Fasak Allied Forces base. She walked among the soldiers and secretly left behind the seeds for a mental plague. This plague could make the infected panic, fluster, and break down emotionally. It was difficult to be placated with normal methods. Hum! The sound of a horn pierced through the gaps between reality and dreams, shattering the hazy world and awakening the soldiers and officers. Audrey didn't hesitate. At the instant before the dream completely shattered, she traversed to the other end of the camp, far away from the group that had planted the seeds of mental plague. In the next second, the dream world completely collapsed, forcing her back into reality. She appeared at the borders of the Intis, Fasak Allied Forces base. Thud! A silvery white beam lit up, exploding beside Audrey, tearing apart the fog. Audrey didn't panic, because being attacked was within her expectations. After entering the Intis, Fasak Allied Forces camp, she knew that her psychological invisibility was very likely to be seen through by others using other clues, such as not being able to completely conceal her malice. Therefore, apart from her psychological invisibility, she also used similar techniques and Hand of Horrors disorder to create another fake version of herself to mislead the possible attackers. In other words, there was still a layer of illusion hidden under her psychological invisibility. And the facts proved that Audrey's understanding of the enemy was correct. The fake version of her had indeed encountered a sudden attack. Taking this opportunity, she retreated into the depths of the fog. Then, a grayish-white dragon that was still in human form appeared. It had mysterious and three-dimensional symbols engraved on its huge scales. They were infiltrating inwards and extending outwards, as though they were interweaving into something indescribable. Something that didn't belong to reality would cause one's mind to go into a frenzy and distort their thoughts just by looking at it. At the same time, a figure dressed in a Faceac general's attire appeared at the spot where Audrey was standing. His face, neck, and palm were covered in silver armor, giving off a cold feeling. Inuni and Klein's shadows landed on a platform covered in orange light. The three silver knights retreated and returned to Derek's and Klein's side. Klein raised his hand to cover his left cheek and laughed at the shadow and Inuni. "It looks like you can't leave that area." He took a few steps forward and spread out his palms. He tusked and said, "What a pity. That way you won't be able to hit me." Bang! The shadow opened its mouth and released an air cannon.